Hello, everyone, and welcome to our podcast on why does efficacy matter? I am your host, Andrew Berkuta. I'm the COO and Chief of Cyber Services at Goliath Cybersecurity Group. With me are guests Ronen, I'll get this, Ahdut, and head of Cynet CyOPS at Cynet.
Hello.
Also, and Rebecca, I'm going to be merciful here. Rebecca Rakoski, got that. She is a cyber attorney with Expan Law Partners, and last but not least, Angelo Longo, who is the head of executive services with Goliath Cybersecurity Group. Also, he's my co-host in a podcast called Cyber Insanity. So, with that, I think we have a very good panel here for you today. So let's kind of go through at a first look at cyber events, right? So this is where it all starts: is how does a cyber event parse out, and let's take a viewpoint of a timeline, a cyber timeline. So there's an event which is the focal point, of course, but then following the event or the right of bang is some activity that happens, and we'll get into that. But often there's little focus of left of bang, which is the preparation, the policies, the regulation, the actions which contribute to the event itself. So in postmortems, it's often contested in questions raised about the degree of efficacy of the cybersecurity posture of the company. So definitions and questions are and impacts are measured at that point. But let's kind of back up here and take a look at this. So what does it mean to detect a threat and then act and then measure effectiveness? And so I want to pick on Ronen on this one because we talk about dwell time. We also talk about places that we reference things like MITRE, for example, on evaluations. How does that play out from a manufacturing standpoint?
Okay, thank you. A great question. So for us, we will create and enable those detections and make sure that we will be there to provide the visibility and to make sure that any step of an attack will be detected in order to reduce any dwell time and effectively reduce the impact. Now, we can create those detections and we can create a ton of visibility, but it could also create a lot of noise. And one of the best ways for us and for the industry to verify our tools and our capabilities and the technology is like what you mentioned, MITRE Ingenuity, which is a test that is there to basically not just go on the a compliance side, or are you compliant with the EDR or XDR? It's basically focuses around the efficacy. How do you detect? How do you prevent? And how do you respond to those events, alerts, incidents? And how do you basically reduce the dwell time and impact? And they do not just test a single scenario. They test what they call the MITRE attack framework, specific TTPs, techniques, and tactics that are used in real-world scenarios by adversaries, and they test our technology against it to see how we, as a manufacturer or the vendor that supplies the technology, are working against it, and basically allow us to test our efficacy in a real world scenario as much as can be real world in this testing.
So there's a lot of countermeasure resiliency that's built into, and obviously Cynet has that resiliency built in, and you scored, I think, the highest in the MITRE evaluation. So you won't brag about it, but I can certainly say it. And that's for a few years now, because your positioning was the countermeasures have to be working in concert with each other to be able to provide this efficacy, I think. Rebecca, let's flip the dialogue a little bit, because now we're talking about the right of bang, right? After something happens, you're engaged as a cyber attorney. Somebody says, "Oh my goodness, Rebecca, we're locked up. We had a breach. We don't know if we had a breach. Maybe we do." You're looking at it at the incident response time and saying, okay, I'm calling the shots. I have a team. We're putting this into place. But then there's some penalties in here. There's penalties or impacts for the incident depth and the duration, that dwell time. Speak to how early like actions can save money and reputation here, because I don't think people realize, or they may realize and go, well, it's not going to happen to me.
Yeah, I think that this is not going to happen to me. Ship has sailed. If that's your philosophy, you may as well just like you're chumming the water with your data. Good luck with that, because like you're getting hit. Like there's no question in my mind. But from my perspective, the what I would call the proactive versus the reactive measures, right? So the proactive measures are going to reduce put you in a defensible position. So I can't stop a breach from happening for my clients. I tell them all the time, like if I could wrap you in bubble wrap and put you on the top of a mountain and not let you connect to the internet at all, now you're protected 100. You have 100% security except from bears and maybe snakes, which I really hate. But other than that, like if you're going to interact with the world, you're exposing yourself to some risk. Depending on the data, that's going to change that risk profile. But with the proactive measures, the more proactive measures somebody puts in place, the shorter the dwell time, the better, right? All of that leads to creating this defensible position. So when we go to court, they can say, well, they should have done this. And I'm like, oh, they did. Oh, well, they should have done that. Oh, they were. They did that too. And they were only in there for a short period of time and right. And so like all of those are weapons at my disposal, because what this really comes down to is reasonableness, right? Like that's what the law is driving at. Were your actions reasonable, given the data that you are collecting, what you're, how long you're holding it, what your processing activities are, your threat vectors, like, were you acting reasonable under that situation? And the more proactive measures that you have, the more reasonable you are. Now, that doesn't mean like small companies are spending what some large bank is spending, right? It has to be reasonable for you, but it also has to be reasonable vis-a-vis the data. And so that's what's really important. That's what I'm looking for in terms of when I go back to before bang, right? I'm looking to see like, what were you doing so that now post, I can say to a court, hopefully in a motion to dismiss, like, these are not the droids you're looking for, keep moving on, right? Or to like an attorney general's office, right? Like, nothing to see here because they were doing what they were supposed to be doing. And, sometimes bad things happen. At the end of the day, and I think I've said this to you before, Andrew, this is the only area where crime victims become defendants in lawsuits, right? Like you are the victim of a crime, somebody broke into your house, and now you have to defend why you couldn't keep them out. And it's like, well, because they wanted to come in. And so, right, like it gets very difficult and it's complicated, very complicated. But the more you give me on the back end, the more I have to defend it in court.
Well, this now I have to look at the third leg of this stool, right? Is where the rubber meets the road. Angelo, I'm going to pick on you here. So how is the implementation of this, right? You want to promote and not deter efficacy of a solution. Where's the practical approach of this?
Well, first off, let's start with the fact that there's that old adage of quick, good, and cheap. Pick two. It's difficult. And when we're looking at some of these items and trying to integrate these things in here, there are many different things we need to take into account. And when I say we, I'm talking about whomever I'm protecting as a company and my fellow people who are working with me. The reality is behind all this is we encounter a number of different issues. How do we make it quicker? How do we automate it? Can we consolidate things? A lot of times we have tool sprawl, which creates an issue in and of itself because now we have multiple consoles, which we now have to need to address. I've seen the effects of that and the effects of multiple consoles and the effects of log overload lead to issues and problems. how do you address that in a practical manner, which allows you to get the meat and potatoes that you need to react and do something with? That's what people want. You know, a board or an executive staff want me to say, we are safe. They don't really care about any of the acronyms I bring to matter. And the reality is, when you come back down to that, is how are you safe? Well, you need to do this, this, and this. And this is the risk that is presented if you don't do X, Y, and Z. If we can't get to a point of agreement at that point, it's very hard to go any further. But having said that, I spend a lot of my time integrating into what the company does to make money. What is their real purpose? How do they do it? And what things from that need to be protected? And if I can isolate the things that they need to protect, the transfers, the data, et cetera, I can build a program that wraps around that. Now it comes down to procedural adherence to how that goes. And if we can get all those things in line, we have the right product or service at the right spot, we can effectively reduce, in the right spot and set correctly. That's another thing that sometimes gets overlooked. You know, you can put whatever you want anywhere. If it doesn't have any, it's not looking at anything, it doesn't do much for you. So the reality is, if you can do all three of those things, you could deliver a product, a solution that gives you pretty high efficiency and efficacy, but there's always the balance. You always got to wait between what you're paying for and what you're getting in the end.
Nice. And I'm gonna table something that you said. You talked about that single console, that single pane of glass. We'll get to that, but I want to first ask, ask and make comment of visibility, right? So clients have been wrestling with that understanding of their environments. And the intent here is obviously to reduce the dwell time, but also to obtain better explanation of what's happening in their environment. And that's that correlation piece of this. And how to verify that things are okay. So I want to start with Rebecca here, because I want to clarify the difference between detection and verification from a legal standpoint. Why make the distinction? Because I've heard people try to interplay with them as one and the same word, but I think they're different, are they not?
Well, if you're talking about detection, that's like the first time it's like a reasonable suspicion, right? Like, I suspect something is happening here, like, we're going to investigate it, right? But it's like you hear a bump in the night, right? You go and you check it out, right? Sometimes your kid knocked something off the bed, sometimes something fell in the kitchen. There's no burglar. It's just, you think you hear something and you check it out. Versus when you are able to verify that an event has happened, right? And you're able to say, okay, we've investigated, and in fact, someone is in our environment, or somebody was in our environment. And like, now what do we do? And that's a real distinction. And I think people are trying to blur the line because, like, especially when you're dealing with third-party vendors, which is a huge issue in every industry, you want to know as close to the point of, we think there's something wrong here, right? The call is coming from inside the house. We want to know that as soon as we can to that detection point. So they start to blur those lines legally because they think, well, if I can push that time back, then I can start to, as the vendor, take the actions, or the company that's hired the vendor, take the actions necessary. I mean, as a lawyer, I want to know as soon as possible, not because I'm necessarily interested in suing you, although I don't necessarily put that as not in the realm of possibility. But I actually would prefer not to. I prefer you do everything you're supposed to do, and you take up the mantle of doing whatever legal obligations, and I just have to sit there and go, okay, you're doing the right thing. But I want to know because depending on the interactions between the organization, the amount of data that's being exchanged, you may want to shut it down. I know it's interesting. I was on a webinar the other day with the administrative offices of the court in the state of New Jersey, and what our ethical obligations are as attorneys is changing, because they're trying, like, we need to let them know if we have a data breach, because they want to cut off our access to stop it from spreading into their system, right? Because I mean, that's a huge issue for them. So many people integrating with their system and logging into their system. So like, I get it. Like, that's why those lines are starting to get blurred. It's also why you need a good cyber lawyer to say, okay, like, where is that line appropriate? And like, let me come up with, I know nobody enjoys a good definition like I do. I like a good definition of each of those terms so that we all know what we're dealing with here, and that we can discuss that and hopefully come to some sort of resolution where I'm learning about it as soon as possible. But you know, you're not giving me a whole bunch of false positives, because I don't want the sky to be falling down every 5 seconds, right? Like, that's ridiculous. No one can conduct business that way.
I think you make a valid point that sometimes we get different definitions for the same word. And I've seen this in the industry. And you know, we'll talk about zero trust in a second, I assure you. But that's one of those definitions that is just all over, right? Angelo, walk through an incident example. Doesn't have to be a big one, but from a detection to a verification to resolution. And like, when does that clock start ticking on notification, and how does that visibility help here, and not only to detect but verify that things are okay?
When that actually starts to tick is generally a conversation between myself, some people internally, a person like Rebecca, maybe a nice person like Rebecca. Nice. Threw that at her. And really kind of deciding what has been exposed, how much of it's been exposed, and to whom. Once we make that determination, then we can make a true verdict on whether there has been the B word, a breach. And by the way, just so everybody knows, you don't mention the B word until someone says it's the B word. It's a very bad thing to start saying the B word early, because it may not be anything. It may, the data that was released, say something got put into the wild, it may be fully encrypted to an acceptable standard and may not be considered an issue. But then there's other times where it hasn't been. It's been exposed in some type of bad version of an encryption protocol that's easily breakable. It could be in just open in the wild with no encryption whatsoever. The issue at hand comes back to making that determination. A number of different ways you make that determination is you start looking at internal logging, you start looking at external logging, you also look at some of the places where your data may be exposed. And obviously you look at probably, which led to this, some type of threat document which said, hey, pay us X or we will expose Y. That's where you end up in the situation where you start getting extremely serious about these items. And the issue at hand comes from that is you need to start from where you are internally, what you can see, what protections you had in place, and what alerts were triggered. So that way you can make a determination if there's any veracity to the claims in question. And the second thing comes into play is then making that investigation in a more formal sort. And that would be engaging a Rebecca to say, hey, we need cybersecurity counsel. By the way, you've already probably talked to or may talk to right afterwards your cyber insurance provider. Obviously, internally, you've had discussions with executives and such like that. So all those things play out. And when you get to the fact of actually being able to deliver a verdict on this, you've already reached a conclusion, most likely, that whatever has occurred, and you know the scope, the exposure, and you know the possible outcomes, and then you're now going to reporting, and reporting now becomes a state by state, country by country type of requirement, and you should already know your requirements based upon that. So that helps.
So that really begs the question, and this is Ronen, I'm going to be picking on you in here a little bit, but from an arsenal of things that you have as countermeasures, right? There are things that you can detect, but then there's also verification pieces that nothing happened, right? I mean, certainly things like forensics come into play, reporting, like Angelo was talking about reporting. I mean, speak to the forensics, the effectiveness of a forensic, like not confusing, but helping.
Yes. So as we see it, it's all a matter of connecting the dots. if we go into the reporting and to the, we got your data encrypted, pay us this amount or else, this is already the cherry on top that the threat actor has left after he was there for a while. Our job is to use the technology, correlate between the dots. If I'm going back to Rebecca and the noise in the night, is it only this noise in the night, or was there somebody who broke a fence before? And is there somebody to correlate these dots and tell us, hey, there's something bigger happening here? And on top of this, we have my team, CyOPS, which is the human layer that interacts and actually performs this validation. So before you even wake up when you hear the thud, there's someone who either checks that there's nothing there, and he just leaves you a nice letter, hey, just so you know, we were here in the night, nothing happened. Or somebody is waking you up saying, wake up, the B world is about to happen, let's make sure it's not. So it's about connecting the dots. It's about consolidating those areas to make sure that we give the lowest time between the detection of an event, which is then translated into an alert, into validating, is it a false positive that should be addressed, or is it a real scenario when the threat actors are on the doorstep, and then make sure that they will not come in.
No, that really then lends to the value of like a comprehensive toolkit, but at a single dashboard, a single view, right? Everybody was talking about a single pane of glass or having a consolidation approach, right? But and I'm going to pick on Angelo here, like how the security posture and customer temperature improve with fewer tools. Has that been measured, or is there a shared story that you have for us that you can comparison between multiple things and something that's down to I don't want to say a minimalistic set, but something that is a correlated set, if that makes sense?
No, absolutely. Yeah. So from my point of view, I didn't get this gray hair from, all the nice things I've been through. I got this from all the going through the mud and dealing with 200 different ways to look at a simple problem. And in the end, that you need to come up with a comprehensive solution that delivers a product that is a security program to an organization. That includes policy, procedure, tools, etc. The reality is you also need to be able to measure that. Metrics and measures are a huge component that get missed by just installing a tool that does whatever. And when you don't measure it, you really have a hard time justifying budget, cost, all those things. So when you start looking at the maturity analysis of an organization, you're really looking at how they measure how well they do, and especially in something like information security. Information technology has tickets where they have, these tickets start ticking and they know how long something took to be repaired. But a lot of times, because detection is the initial component generally of an issue in information security, it's hard to measure the effectiveness because you don't really know when the non-detection was there. So you end up reacting to rather than being proactive for these things. So when you start looking at an environment that's doing that, and your tool sprawl becomes too much to be able to deliver an effective verdict in a very short amount of time, the reduction in tools is a huge component to being able to deliver the better metrics in this stuff. And that reduction in tools can only come from effective tools that do multiple things. And I'm not saying there is a single pane of glass. I will not say that. And it's very hard to anybody to say you have one thing that serves all purposes and can fulfill all your needs. But I will say there are effective tools out there that deliver on a number of different chunks of a security program that help us reduce that tool sprawl to a point of having effective information readily available to make decisions. And I think that is the huge component of this in how you can effectively show, hey, we were attacked X amount of times last month. 25% of them had an effective penetration because X, Y, and Z. Firewall patches weren't put into place. Some type of web protection wasn't effective. Whatever it might be. And then you can say, but because of the fallback protocols for the fallback controls, we effectively caught X, Y, and Z. That's where we need to get to, is effectively measuring those workflows, those pieces, to be able to say, yes, this is what the value of that console is. The value of, I'm doing my Italian thing, sorry. The value of the things that happen here. And that in and of itself is only done through hard integration across multiple components that help you deliver on that true goal.
Rebecca, so from a right of bang situation, when you're being pulled into this stuff, is that single console, that minimal amount of things to look for, is that a help or a hindrance here? Because in some cases I hear, oh, the more things that you have, the more intelligence, more forensics you can gather. But the problem is, as said, that could be noise, or that could be a distraction, or there's no meeting of the minds as far as the definition of where the problem started.
Right.
Where's that balance?
So, I mean, first off, when Angelo started, other than tuning him out, which is what I normally do, but like I was listening to him this time, and no, all kidding aside, like what he says is like really interesting, because I was thinking the whole time, like having that kind of metrics where you're saying, okay, like they got into the screened-in porch, but they didn't get into the door. I'm just going to keep going with this because Ronen got into it, you got into it. We're just going to go with the whole someone broke into the house scenario. They got into the screened-in porch, but then we were able to stop them before they broke into the main part of the house, right? Like that kind of data is really important. Or they did get into the house, but the dog got them immediately, right? Like, so you may have a reportable incident, you may have something you have to report anyway, but those mitigation efforts and the ability to show that is really going to be critical, because it becomes another arrow that I have to shoot at, metaphorically, of course, my adversary when we are, talking about what they did and what that company was doing. On the flip side, if the stuff isn't working or no one's manning the shop, that could be detrimental. So it goes back to cybersecurity isn't just like a set it and forget it, right? Like somebody's always got to be kind of watching things. But being able to show, even when somebody breaks in, because like I said before, like there is no 100% security. Like it's never going to happen. And anybody who says, oh, we're 100%, you're 100% secure is lying to you, right? Because that's, again, mountaintop of Montana, right? But if you are doing all of these things and you have this layered security, which is what I think we're all talking about here, those things demonstrate that you are acting reasonably. And that reasonableness goes to either I win at motion to dismiss, or I win at summary judgment, or I eventually win at trial, because I don't like to lose. So eventually, that's what that all plays into, but it can be very helpful. But making sure that these pieces are in place and we're doing what we're supposed to be doing with them is also going to be really critical. And even though I have Rakoski, I'll use my hands too, because I like.
There you go. Ronen, this really asked the question then. I know that people often say, oh, my single console is a SIEM, however you want to pronounce it. That's got to be it, right? And they go down this path and saying, okay, but it's lacking. It doesn't provide the expected results that they've been looking for. And so from a Cynet perspective, that one pane of glass approach can be done more elegantly, right? You have the CLM, for example, but you tie that back and you have the innovation that ties back into it to provide you that built but not bought design, right? Have you run into those issues where people said, I made a mistake, SIEM is not it, SIM is not it?
Yeah. So as you said, it's not about just collecting and getting all the data into one spot. It's also about acting on it and getting to, first of all, understand what we're seeing. So a single pane of glass and a consolidated console really is here to fight the many consoles that you should go to. And while we would like to provide as much capabilities that we can, we understand that, for example, somebody might go with a different firewall or whatever other a product that they would like. And we understand that for us to have the visibility and the capability to act upon this visibility is us requiring to integrate it into our console. So CLM is there to basically collect all these events. And from this and from the built, not bought, and by knowing our capabilities and by integrating those other sources that are critical for this a single pane of glass, we are able to produce a XDR alerts that are correlated between the EDR, the network, and any other third-party appliance that will allow you to once again get the noise in the garden and the thud in the floor, and to understand that, hey, something is happening here. So it's not just about the SIEM, about only collecting the data. It's about acting on it and of course, using automations and whatever it is that you can to make sure that you reduce as much as possible the time between the identification to the action. And the verification can come after, but first let's make sure that we took the action, we mitigated as much as possible, and it allows you to take any actions follow-up and to make sure everything from there. But those automations allow us to get all the data from all the sources that we need, integrate it into one place, take action, validate it with a human, and make sure that we're reducing all this noise and actually moving with actionable items and acting upon results from within the alerts and the console and the validation that we're taking.
Beautiful. And now I have this picture of Rebecca's analogy of a house. There's the garden known with spy cameras, right, in the garden. So, okay, we're going to speed round this because of time, but something was said in here a few times, zero trust, right? There was the big banner of zero trust. We hear everybody embracing it, jumping through, skipping through the roads and saying we have zero trust, zero trust, zero trust, and spreading it all over like I don't know, like Skittles on a rainbow. But the fact of the matter is many definitions in the industry on zero trust differ. And so what does it really mean in practice? And is this a proactive approach, or is this a good enough? And let's just look at this. Angelo, in less than a minute, I mean, can we move beyond the theory at this point and explain how it reduces dwell time and protects the sensitive data in the real world operations? I mean, who has this successfully done?
Well, that's a secondary question. Success in zero trust. I mean, it's a strategy. Let's face it. It's not a product. It's not a service. It's a strategy. But are you really Andrew Berkuta? I don't know. Let me. I need to see if you really are Andrew Berkuta. And then if I know you're Andrew Berkuta, are the words you're saying true? And if the words you're saying are true, then am I receiving them correctly? These are the kind of questions you need to start asking when you start looking at zero trust as a strategy. You need to start looking at and defining what you're talking to, who's talking to it, why it's talking to it, and where it's going to take that information. You need to start looking at things more in depth. So if we're going to look at how we reduce dwell time, it's about being more introspective at the right places at the right time and getting that data to the right people to make a decision. There's obviously a level of trust you need to put in somebody in the organization. And that level of trust needs to be translated into someone who can take action. So when you start looking at the data flowing in and the data flowing out and you having to make a judgment call, you need to look at it from the perspective of being able to verify the intended recipient, intended sender, and the intended data being sent in the intended way for the intended purpose. That's really kind of the end all be all of what you're trying to accomplish. It's not a product. It's how you do all that is a concept and a strategy. That's the only way to reduce this time that you need to deliver that product. But I can't say any more in a minute.
Well,
So
arguably, well, that really then flips the script a little bit to Ronen, who in this industry, in the cybersecurity industry, are we able to close the gaps, and can companies really realize that zero trust is achievable, and like, what does it look like, how this gap is being closed? Because usually large companies embrace zero trust, but there's a big spend versus results action that takes place, right? You have to spend so much to get this risk mitigation process or this program in place. How's the industry closing the gap to make it affordable for all?
Okay, so apologies everybody, I will stop using the home intruder analogy, and I will take a different one,
Sure.
the castle analogy, where everybody loved using it. In the past, we used to put the defenses before the castle, but what happened if someone waltzes into the castle with an admin account? Now we see that based on data and reports in the past years, more and more threat actors are using valid credentials to get inside. They're bypassing the regular defenses that we put simply by walking inside. What we are trying to and are developing constantly, and as Angelo said, this is a mindset, and this is something that needs to be constantly addressed. We are not looking at who should or should not get in. It's once they're in, should they do it or not? You can use a PowerPoint in your environment on a daily basis, which is amazing, but should PowerPoint reach out to PowerShell and try to access credentials? Probably not. So we trust PowerPoint in our environment, but we trust it to a degree. And from there, going back to the build not bot, based on research and based on data and based on insights that we see from day-to-day research and activities and incidents, we are able to fine-tune this zero trust into a less noisy scenario, into a scenario that will allow you to focus on real incidents. And it is tricky, but it can be also fine-tuned and harnessed to a way that will show you the true positives. And those are the most impactful, by the way.
Nice. Rebecca, here's where I flip the switch and ask, as a person seeing the incident response, dealing with this in litigation and everything, is zero trust the final answer here? Is that enough? Because everybody that touts about zero trust, it's a program, it's the process behind this, it's going internal. The zero trust, you can get a breach too, could you not?
Absolutely. Because as Angelo pointed out, it's also a mindset, right? Like,
yeah,
you're wearing a tinfoil hat on a regular basis really with zero trust, right? And not just myself, who I've been wearing one for years, but everybody in your organization has to have that buy-in, has to have that belief in that, like, I have to make sure that person is who it is, and right? Like, so I would say zero trust is a piece of the puzzle, is another arrow, if you will, for me. But it's not, there is no one, this is your solution, this is all you need, here you go, you've got it. If you take this, take the red pill and not the blue pill, and you'll be just fine, right? Like, that's just not where we are. And I don't think we're ever going to be there, because threat actors are changing what they're doing, and we adjust to, and we're making those adjustments. So, like, unfortunately, for better or worse, we're basically playing chess with the threat actors. Some of them play checkers. I prefer those threat actors because they're not that smart. But the ones who are playing chess, and you really are, they are your adversary, and you're making moves. It's moves and counter moves, moves and counter moves. And that's what we're going to be doing. But it's an arrow. It's not and there's no one thing that is going to solve the cybersecurity problem, at least not yet, probably not in my lifetime.
So,
And
so
even though I
let's-
don't have as many gray hairs as Angelo, I have a great colorist. So they're in there.
That's important.
Can you give me a
So-
recommendation?
So let's continue this, because we're looking at like, how is cybersecurity industry, is it meeting the client expectation for effective measures, and what does that look like, right? So we're looking at not just zero trust is not the panacea for everything. It's a piece, it's an arrow in our quiver.
Mhm.
But then we run into things from a regulatory perspective, or some guidelines that, quite frankly, can be vague. And there's gray areas there. I know it's the law.
Shocking.
But then the words, and you said this in the beginning, using things like due diligence or all reasonable efforts, that's very subjective. And how can we bridge this gap when we're viewing this from different industries incorporating these countermeasures? I mean, is this gray area where we're going to be living, or is it constantly being defined, and these security measures, countermeasures, techniques, and everything, are they meeting it now? Where's that gap? There's a gap, it seems.
There is a gap, right? And I will also say that the law has not caught up to where we are from a technological perspective, right? So like, that's always going to be an issue. The law lags behind, because we're batting cleanup, right? We're the something has gone horribly wrong, and that's why there's a lawyer brought in, right? Like, that's why we have litigation. That's why we have notification requirements. So like,
well, it's based on precedents, right?
Right. And
something
like,
has to happen.
Right. Something, right? Like I joke around, like, I'm like, the great thing about what I do as a lawyer in this area is that we're basically making the law. The bad thing that I do in this area is we're basically making the law, right? So like, I can't go and look, like, a personal injury lawyer, a family law attorney, a real estate lawyer, hundreds of years of case law to rely on to say, this is what we should be doing and this is how we should be doing it. That's not what we have here. And because we're dealing with this rapidly changing threat environment, it's never going to catch up. Like, it's never going to be a point where I'm like, okay, well, we can look at a case from 5 years ago and go, oh, they had, really complex passwords in training, and that was good enough. Well, it probably wasn't good enough 5 years ago, and it's not good enough now, right? Like, so like, it's never going to align perfectly, I think. And we lawyers like to use words like reasonable, like what you were saying, like, your best
All
efforts,
reasonable efforts.
or all reasonable efforts, right? Like, those are great phrases, like up to and including, right? Like, we love those. Like, depending on which side I'm on, I either want really firm language or I want wiggle room, right? Like, so like, because I'm representing a client, that's going to color how I'm defining a term. If I'm defining a term from the vendor's perspective, I want the wishy-washy language. If I'm from the customer's perspective, I want the strong, like, clear language. So it really depends on like where you sit. And I think this is why I always say, like, well, I have general counsel. I'm like, general counsel doesn't understand this, right? Like, and they never will, because general counsel is dealing with, how much is this going to cost, right? Do we have a limitation of liability provision? They're not dealing with what happens when there's a data breach, and how much time do we have, and what are we doing with this, and who's going to be doing, like, that's the stuff that your privacy and security lawyer should be dealing with exclusively, because that's all we deal with exclusively, right? So like, that's going to be really important. But yeah, to answer your question, you're never going to have someone who says, this is what you're going to do, and this is the answer, because like Ronen's like shaking his head, right? Because it's changing too quickly.
Well,
if I say it today, tomorrow it's old, right?
It's not just that it's changing
I was just going to pick
quickly.
on Ronen on this, because here we have, there's a lag on the law, right? And to some degree, I mean, Cynet prides itself on the innovation and the countermeasures and the building of that, right? The belt and suspenders and building that into it. But at some point, you have also, I don't want to say reactive, but there is a reactive component to building countermeasures that are addressing a zero-day threat or something else, or something that's maturing in there. There's a gap there too, and how you I guess, how are you addressing that to be as effective as possible for the client?
Yeah. So, first of all, connecting to what Rebecca said, I think that the law and the technology and CISOs and basically all of us are adapting to what threat actors are currently doing. And they are the first to adapt new technologies, new capabilities, and anything new out there they can give them the edge, they will use it. Now, the way we see it, and I think the way everybody sees it, is that any day there will be something new. There can be a new vulnerability and a new way to get in any day. And if you're going again to a MITRE and the example that we gave with the ransomware, which is the cherry on top, there has been probably 20, 30, 40, 50, even more steps before this has happened to get to this point. So even with a new vulnerability that no one knows about, if we're using multiple layers to make sure that we're protecting each step of the kill chain, then we're making sure that we can get the threat actors. So they might go through the first layer, but hey, there's another one here to catch them. And it affects the impact. It really affects the impact and the outcome of the incident.
Nice. So you mentioned this, the CISO, and here's where Angelo gets teed up, because I think he and I had a great discussion as CISOs are, I guess this is the epiphany. CISOs become the, what's the word? The
Pinata.
The pinata for the company, right?
Cyber risk pinata.
Cyber risk pinata. So there's a lag in the law. There's a lag in the countermeasure to catch up to whatever the threat is. Tag, you're it. Where do you go for that? And then in the last closing remarks on this topic.
It is a very difficult road blade to walk on, because the issue at hand comes down to you need to have an information coming in at you both ways. You need a Rebecca saying, hey, you need to be aware of this. You need to be aware of this. She needs to kind of know your business. You need to know your business. And then you need a Ronen and his team to be giving you information on what's happening in the business. But the end goal of this is not to be here, open to work. You really want to be at a point where you're bringing risk to the executives, to the board, and delivering a profile which says, listen, I have a tool, a service, a program, or something that can help reduce this risk by X. Because if you're just trying to put a tool in place, it's not gonna be effective. But you need to look at the problem, look at the solution, and need to look at the delivery. And when you do that, you can effectively deliver on a goal which helps you get to that 80% mark, that 90% mark. Because you are not going to reach 100. Please get that out of your mind. And you're not going to be available 24/7 because you will die. So the reality is you need to have something in place which gives you the ability to look at, react, wake you up and say, hey, this is where we're at and this is what's going. And so without that, and this is what I think CISOs end up being a CISO a few times. The first couple of times, it's like you're a new employee. You're getting used to what you're doing. You're getting understanding how you do it, and you're delivering what you believe is what you're supposed to be doing. And then sooner or later, you end up realizing is what you really need to illustrate is the risk profiles of the organization. What risks the organization have, and how you can help reduce that risk in a monetary sense by investment versus reward. Because that's the end goal. Is you need to show the risk, assign the risk, and deliver a solution, or at least propose a solution that the executive or the business organization can make a decision on. If you start getting into the other channels, you will end up with gray hair, and then you end up, later on learning from your mistakes. Stop touching the hot stove. Stop. Don't touch it.
Well, folks, this is the conclusion of our program. I want to thank Rebecca Rakoski at Xpan Law Partners for participating today. I want to also thank Ronen Ahdut head of Cynet's CyOPS, Angelo Longo at Goliath Cybersecurity Group, and of course, somebody who's not on this, but is working tirelessly in the back end is Kirsten Vogelsang, Senior Channel Marketing Manager at Cynet, for orchestrating this podcast and the behind-the-scenes work that has been able to put us on this podcast today. Goliath Cyber Advisory Services create secure programs that integrate leading technologies like Cynet and for more mature security posture outcomes. And we build relationships with experts like Rebecca, who's a cyber attorney. And as our listeners internalize this podcast, it should be clear that cybersecurity happens in threes, right? We talk about that three-legged stool. Just like people, process, technology, they're integral and should, and these are integral to things like relationship, to establish a proactive relationship between vendors, legal counsel, and advisory practitioners who, in this case, build a stable foundation and address and defend against that attack timeline. These are also who can help you measure the efficacy to minimize your cyber risk. Never going to be 100%, but we can get it closer. So it's a partnership and a trusted relationship that is imperative today. And this helps provide that survivability and resiliency against today's threats in the threat landscape. The combination between the Goliath Cyber Services, Cynet's powerful and integrated platform, and the legal expertise from a cyber attorney, not just an attorney, but a cyber attorney. This provides a strong foundation and will provide you the survivability to manage the timeline both from the left and the right side of an event. So if you have any questions, or comments, or would like to see other topics discussed, please leave your comments in the comment section below and or send me your suggestions with the email provided. I'm your host, Andrew Berkuta. Until next time, practice safe computing.